if we're going to be responsible adults and parents, it does seem very irresponsible to have so little work done. We've got incredible teams at many law enforcement agencies called ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, who do really great work and are drastically underfunded. You know, if we would take this as serious as we take domestic terrorism, we could make a much safer society for children to grow up in.
This is Josh Steinley, your host here for the Hope Strategy podcast. I'm not here with my co-host Corey Blake here today because he's got COVID, so he's out. But we have a fantastic interview with Jess Larsen. He's the chairman at Greystoke Investments. It's a real estate investment trust. And he also is the founder of Greystoke Media. And what we really wanted to get him in, though, to talk to him about was he's the founder of Child Rescue Association. So we're going to hear a little bit about Jess's story because he's got a story of hope about starting these $1 million funds and then losing them and then starting over again and going from rags to riches to rags to riches and back and forth, and some of the experiences he had in his personal life. But then what we really dive into is we talk about child trafficking, which is a topic that doesn't sound like it has a lot of hope in it, but you'll hear the stories that Jess tells about what his association has done, what other people are doing, how you can get involved, and the real hope there is for people who have been through one of the most horrific experiences ever to come out of it and recover and thrive. And so give it a listen. And if you happen to be a billionaire, please go give Jess $50 million to do more of what he does, rescuing these children from these terrible situations. Hope you love this one. There's a lot of hope in it. Wait for the end. Listen all the way to the end so that you get some of those stories.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious. I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
So Jess, give us the story. Where are you from? How'd you get started in life?
Grew up in Western Canada in Alberta, moved down to Southern California for a few years, was on a mergers and acquisitions team for Citigroup, started some businesses, ended up back in Canada running a private equity fund. The last 8 years or so, been here in the land of good snowboarding outside Park City, Utah. We built a house up in the mountains so we can do some snowboarding out of the backyard.
Is it true that everybody in Canada is nice and polite all the time?
That is not true, but there is a deep emphasis on humor. I make a comparison that Americans are really good at getting ahead and pursuing opportunity. Canadians are really good at turning everything into a joke.
Where's the snowboarding better, Canada or Utah?
You know, there's some amazing places in Canada. Some of my favorite places on earth are in interior BC, Golden, British Columbia, Revelstoke, Fernie, places like that. But Utah, you can get the armpit deep powder without the -30. So it's fluffier here, but it doesn't last as long. You know, it's so cold up there that you can ride stuff that's 3 weeks old and it's still fluffy. Here, you know, the season starts later and ends earlier and the powder doesn't last as long, but man, is it fluffy when it gets here.
Yeah, cool. So tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurial experiences with the funds that you've started and how you got into that in the first place.
Originally, I was going to be a pro snowboarder, and then I was going to be an artist who drew the pictures on snowboards. So I went to art school. I was an illustration major at same school as you, Rick's College, BYU, Idaho. Dropped out to be an entrepreneur. Had maybe, 14 different businesses. Most of them were total failures, but a couple made a lot of money. In between there, after one of my sales training companies went out of business, which was kind of a mystery to me. My old boss from a sales training company recruited me to starting a business with him. And we were making enough money to cover our bills. But he called me one day after starting it and said, hey, you know, that loan that I said I had for our startup money, that money I said I had for our startup cash, that was actually a loan I was hoping to get. I didn't get it. I don't have the money I owe you, and we're out of business. And that was an exciting week. We just had our first child a couple days earlier, and the insurance called and said that they were canceling us because they hadn't gotten the payment. I was like, well, why didn't you just call? I would have paid, let me get our card. And they're like, no, you don't understand. This is Cobra insurance from when you quit your last job, and it's canceled and it can't come back. And we canceled you retroactively through last month. I was like, you mean last month when we were in the hospital having the baby? So we got stuck with $30,000 in medical debt, man. Which, for, early 20s in a 1-bedroom duplex in Huntington Beach, California, may as well have been $300,000 or $3 million, or, you know what I mean? Especially after finding out that I no longer had a business and didn't have the money I was owed. Right. So that was exciting. It rains,
it pours. You got all the blessings at once, right?
Yeah.
Baby,
yeah.
And
right.
No job, no business, and no money.
I was like, do we declare bankruptcy and give the car back to the bank, move into my parents' basement? What do we do? My mentor, now business partner, John Verhessen, had got me listening to these tapes when I was driving my car around. And this successful guy said that when you climb up a ladder, you're going to find out there's a glass ceiling you didn't know about, and you're going to pound on it. It's not going to move. And then you're going to see another ladder tipped up somewhere else. And you're going to think, oh man, that looks way easier. There's no glass ceiling over there. So you're going to climb down this ladder. You're going to go climb up over there. And then you can find out there's a glass ceiling over there as well. So you can either waste all that time or you can just stay here and pound on the glass ceiling you're at. I remember this talk in church once. A guy said that the devil is going to, if he can't get you to sin, he's going to use disappointment and discouragement on you. And I just thought, like, yeah, that's what's going on here. There's no way my life could be as bad as it feels right now. I remember being in my backyard or tiny little duplex, and walked back in the house, said, honey, we're not declaring bankruptcy. We're not moving back to my parents. We're going to stay here and beat this. And she was crying again for like the 100th time that week. And so I just went around trying to find a job in money. I was like, I obviously don't understand enough about money. So I was applying for like stockbroker jobs and stuff. And they would be like, Jess, I'm looking at your resume. What was it about your background that made you think you qualify for this job? And I was like, oh, nothing. I just need to know more about money and I can learn anything. Anyways, I didn't get any of those jobs. But my headhunter, who had got me my job at Black & Decker that I'd quit to start the sales training business, I called her back and said, hey, I'm back on the market. She loved me. Back on the market. You got anything good for me? I want a job in money. And she called me back and said, well, do you want to do mergers and acquisitions for the #1 mid-market M&A shop in the world? Do you want to go work for Citigroup? I was like, oh, that sounds okay. So I had to do multiple interviews, not having a MBA, but eventually they took me on because they figured I could talk to entrepreneurs, and I did really well. I shot up to the #2 guy on the team out of 25 people. And I found out about owning investment funds. It sounded like entrepreneurship for people with ADD. And so I thought I needed one of those. And after a number of other ups and downs, I was able to start one, and now we're doing our next one.
Along the way with your 14 businesses that you started, you had a few jobs tucked in there as well. I mean, like the Citigroup one, and then you worked for Arbinger Group for a while, right?
Yeah. After major catastrophe meltdown post 2008, I decided I was going to take a break, and the management consulting firm that I was a client of, called the Arbinger Institute, those guys were my heroes. They wrote some incredible books, really changed my life. And I called and said, hey, would there be an opportunity with you guys? They said, yeah, do I want, asked me if I wanted to run Canada for them. And I said, well, that's exciting, but, I know your material really well, but not your business. Why don't you let me come down to the States and follow you around for 6 months and learn your business model as well? And I said, I want to come back to these Canadian CEOs, and instead of saying, when those guys taught, leadership to the Navy SEALs and Microsoft and Oracle and places, I'm going to be able to say, when I taught the Navy SEALs and Microsoft and Oracle. And so why don't I come down there? And they thought that was great. So a couple of months after being down here, they just said, hey, what would it take to get you to stay and help build the global business with us? And did that for a couple of years. Is pretty eye-opening for me. I got to be the director of the Special Operations Command and Intelligence Agencies practice, and did that for about 2.5 years, and then till we started our own.
So that's where you've got your introduction to all these military guys that you work with today. Is that right?
Yeah, most of them. Yep.
Or the idea of working with military guys generally, which we want to dive into a little bit more, because that will bring us into the main subject that we want to focus on here. So you got an education in money at Citigroup and then launching your own funds. Talk about the success and the other side of what you experienced with the funds that you launched.
made a lot of money at certain times. And one of our funds post 2008 was not successful. We had major government regulations that we lost 80% of our sales force in 2 weeks. The ups and downs of the oil market, people might be familiar with, and we were in the energy space. Yeah, it was extremely rough, trying time. It's kind of where I lost my religion in speculation and became a Warren Buffett devotee. And I've spent the last decade becoming really a follower of compound interest investing. So this new one we're pursuing is just buying boring, reliable real estate buildings. We're focused on multifamily apartment buildings that are still paying really well in the middle of COVID.
Well, what's the difference between speculation and what Warren Buffett does?
His hero, his mentor and university professor from Columbia University, Ben Graham, wrote about it in his book called The Intelligent Investor, that Warren Buffett says is the most important investment book ever written. But he basically says that for something to be an investment, it needs to have safety of principal plus an adequate return. It needs to make money. So things like gold or stuff like that would not be an investment. He says things lacking one or both of those things would be speculative. And so what he means by that is that the price people pay for them goes up and down based on human emotion, not on an intrinsic value from the amount of money that it makes. So he says, a piece of land could be speculative or it could be an investment. If the land doesn't make any money, it just sits there, its price goes up and down depending on how people feel about it. And he said, but if that is like a farm that's being rented or something like this and it produces income, then if you can look at how much it will reliably make for the next coming years, you can figure out how much that is worth to you. And as long as you can get it at a price that's a good price or better for you compared to what it's going to make, you're ideally making an investment based on the intrinsic value of that income stream. So you've got safety of principal of the asset itself, and you valued it off its cash flow. Whereas, Bitcoin or gold or a piece of land that doesn't make money, many of those things, they go up and down based on people's emotions. And so that's, much more like gambling in the sense of there's a lot of people who will forecast what they think people's emotions are going to be next. But statistically, they're often worse than flipping a coin.
So does Buffett not put any money in gold? I mean, even as a hedge against other things?
I don't know that he's never owned any, but he would tell you that it is not an investment, as his mentor and hero and former employer would suggest it. I mean, he does things like he'll buy a gold mine. He recently bought gold mines. But again, those are income producing assets, right? So I don't know that he's never bought something that would be speculative, but he says, he looks for 1 foot bars to step over, not 7 foot bars to jump over. If you can buy a reliable income stream and then compound the interest you make from it, he feels like that's what he refers to as his simple approach to investing.
There's kind of a analogy to draw here between the name of this podcast, Hope Strategy Podcast, and this idea of the difference between investment and speculation, because the whole reason we came up with this name was there are all these people out there saying hope is not a strategy. And we're thinking, well, is that right? Or is there a contrarian way to look at that? And we thought, well, there is hope. I mean, hope has to be part of your strategy. If you have no hope, you don't do anything. So there's got to be hope. There's got to be hope every step of the way. But I think what people are really saying when they say hope is not a strategy is that hope is not a strategy by itself. By itself, hope is not worth much unless it leads to intelligent action. And kind of like with speculation, I mean, people can make money with speculation, so it's not a hopeless venture, but there is, you're buying it and then you just sit there and you hold on to it and you hope that it goes up, but it's not like you can really do anything to make it go up, not ethically anyway. I mean, you buy land, you buy gold, whatever, you are dependent on other people. And then you just hope that things get better, that people feel different about it. Whereas with an investment, maybe if you invest in a business, maybe you're not in control of that business per se. But if you invest in your own business, you're certainly in control of that. And there is a little bit more predictability and a bit more of a plan there for how you get your return on investments. So there could be a comparison to draw there. Anyway.
I would completely agree. I think it depends on that definition of hope. If hope is just wishful thinking, not based on evidence, how different than gambling is that? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Right. when Warren Buffett buys Dairy Queen, when he buys these businesses, he has hope that their previous track records are indicators of their future success. But it's an evidence-based hope, right?
The hope is based on something that is real, that actually exists. Whereas you could go back to gold and stuff and say, well, that's based on something real, something that exists. Well, yeah, but also gold could drop to being worthless. If we're all fighting each other in a big civil war and the thing that's really valuable is food, who's going to really care about gold at that point? Wheat will be the thing that we all want.
Maybe it won't be worthless, right? But somebody wins the lottery every day too. So people have made huge amounts of money speculating. It's almost more like, what's your martial art? What sport are you playing? And there's people who are professional gamblers that can do well, right? But what he's saying is like the simple approach that has a high portion of reliability is the martial art he promotes, which is this compound interest investing. And you think about, I don't know, I think hope is like the number one reason any of us have any clients in our businesses. If they didn't hope that their future would be better with us than without us, why would they have ever given us their money?
Exactly. So if we give people no hope, we give people no reason to work with us. Well, let's get into what we really came here to talk about today, which is helping children who are in bad situations. So tell us a bit about your organization and how this got started, how you got interested in this. What's the motivation behind it? Tell us the whole story here.
So Child Rescue Association of North America, Child Rescue website is just childrescueassociation.org. It's we're combating child trafficking and the production of child exploitation images. We just feel really strongly about it. Unfortunately, it's something that happened to my mother-in-law as a 12-year-old in Santa Monica, California. She was the fourth generation in her family. My wife's great-great-grandma had this happen to her. Unfortunately, a man 17 years older than her took advantage of her and got her pregnant and then started renting her out to people in town when she was a very young teenager. And then his daughter, that was my wife's great-grandma, Reen, but her great-grandma, Anne, same thing. When she got to be a young teenager, he started renting her out as well. She told her mom, who was more like her sister, they're so close in age. She said, hey, he's so violent, he's going to kill you. We got to get out of here. Let's run away to Chicago. The problem with this crime is there's so much conditioning that happens that it's very cyclical. It's very easy for them to get re-exploited. And in Chicago, kind of the same thing happened again. And they ended up getting back involved in that and exploited. And when my wife's grandma Joyce was born, who I knew, just the kind of men that were around, she was being abused as a very young child. And then as a teenager got pushed into doing it for money as well. Then they all moved to California. My mother-in-law was born, and same thing. She is abused from age 3 on. Only one of those men ever got prosecuted when she was in the first grade. And then at 12, she got pushed into it herself. And you got to understand the psychology of this multi-generational stuff. By the time this has happened for decades in the family, they don't really think of it as bad as you and I do. Then my mother-in-law and her younger brother got abandoned in a hotel, and her mom went off to Vegas with some guy. And after about a month, the hotel people asked them to move out. And I always wonder where child services was at this point, but called her grandma, Anne, in Northern California, and said that she's putting her younger brother on a bus, but that she wasn't coming. And she dropped out of the 8th grade to try and get a job at Pioneer Chicken and support her brother a bit, do some panhandling. But she ended up just kind of living under the pier and with some street kids. And you can guess what self-medicating on the streets of LA looked like. But, a year later, her mom came back into her life and tried to get her to do it again. And she said that I'm never doing that again. That's not happening to my kids. Even though she had a really rough life for the next number of years, she went on to kick all the drugs. And she has 4 children. She raised a dentist, and 2 of her kids are business owners, and her 4th child's happily married with a couple little grandbabies. When my wife was about 11, she married a nice man that was my wife's dad for the rest of his life until about 4 or 5 years ago when he passed away from cancer, my father-in-law, Bob. And in many ways, she went on to have very many elements of the American dream. And, from the resume of what some people would call a throwaway kid, it's a term we don't even think should exist. And so pretty close for home for us. And so 10 years ago, we started Child Rescue to see what we could do to help out the issue. And we've done a lot of things. We've done aftercare programs. We've helped support and help build an aftercare orphanage in Cusco, Peru, and support some ones here in the States. We've done prevention campaigns at high schools, like these chapters by high school kids for high school kids. We've done law enforcement trainings and assisted with undercover rescue missions and tried to get in the media and bring up the awareness and get a lot more parents to care. And it's been exceedingly encouraging. In one decade, the change in society we've seen. I mean, movies like Liam Neeson's Taken, I mean, that movie probably did more good for this cause than all the documentaries put together. But just, CNN Heroes Project and there are great documentaries, and there's so many great folks who have made this part of the public consciousness. And something that kind of used to get swept under the rug is underage prostitution, because it had been misdiagnosed, which to me sounds like underage willing participation. It's like when the news says underage prostitute, people can say, oh, that's so sad that girl is choosing that, or that young boy is choosing that. It sounds like underage drug addict or something. But if they say, 13-year-old kidnapping rape victim, all of a sudden, all the soccer moms in town are like, what? That happened here? What, and all of a sudden people get all up in arms, and it could be the exact same situation, just mislabeled, right?
Wow. So did you know anything about this world before you married your wife and heard her family story?
Yeah, actually, in high school, I found out one of my best friends had been abused, and I was just shocked. And within 2 weeks, I found out another one of my really best friends as well. Another one of my really close friends found out she'd been abused as a kid. And I was just shocked. I don't know. I thought that happened to other people or something. And I was really torn up about it, that they had to go through that. And, in my early 20s, when I was first in college, I found out that people were doing this to kids as a business. And I thought, man, that's got to be about the worst. That's got to be about the worst thing on earth, or, really up there in top 5 worst things going on, Actually, I was at a business conference at a big sports stadium, NBA stadium, and here in Utah, I think called the Delta Center back there. And there's this Baptist preacher guy. I don't know why they had a Baptist preacher at a business conference, but he was good. And he said that God had a calling for everybody in life. And he says, if you don't know what yours is, God gave you a hint. It's whatever makes you the angriest. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I knew what made me the angriest, and it was this.
So how did you get this association started?
In Alberta, Canada, we started an association. And then down here in the States, we filed for our 501c3 status. And really close friend of mine who's now a business partner, Lindsay Hadley, she was been in nonprofits for 10 years by then. And we were able to hire her to come run it for us. And it really promotes the principle of hire people better than yourself. She was incredible. She got it all started. And then she threw a big benefit concert here in Utah at a place called Thanksgiving Point, south of Salt Lake City, Utah. She got 311 and Dashboard Confessional and Neon Trees and Third Eye Blind, and maybe I already said them. Anyways, like 20 bands through this big music festival, and we got 4,000 kids to come out and the news to cover it, and showed parts of documentaries and had trafficking survivors get on stage and talk to these kids and say, this happened to me, and LAPD people. And anyways, it was amazing, the kind of support we got from the community and people who became lifelong committed to caring about this cause after that. And, we really owe it all to Lindsay.
So who are some of the type of people that you recruit to actually carry out these operations, and what does that look like? I mean, there must be a lot of research and preparation that goes into something. Like, can you kind of take us through like kind of a case study or a timeline of how this works from beginning to end?
Yeah. So specifically this law enforcement support program that we've done in different iterations over the years. Sometimes it's been supporting other groups that are doing this. There's a really great group that operates in Central America that we've sent money to for them to run operations. Here in the States, sometimes we've funded law enforcement where we're not even involved. We just either we're paying overtime hours or things like that. Or, some of these guys from the U.S. Special Operations community and intelligence community who work with us or volunteer with us have helped out. That can take different forms. Sometimes it's posing as gringo dirtbags looking for a good time and working with the police to come do a sting operation like you might have seen other organizations do. Other times it's the development of intelligence. So one of our bigger successes, we try to be careful about what we share and don't share so we can do it over again. The bad guys don't know what we're going to do next time, right? But essentially we have some guys who were in the classified units of the most elite special operations, special mission units. they had some contacts and had developed some information, some intelligence that one of the transnational crime groups was going to be moving a bunch of kids over a border and using them as drug mules. And then would, once they got over the border, would rent them out as sex slaves. And we were able to find out where it was going to happen. And so our spec ops guys went and hid out in the desert for a week doing overwatch and working with some federal and local authorities, and was able to coordinate with some landowners and some other things to be able to get some special permissions, and was able to, signal law enforcement at just the right time for them to be able to do the bust and get all these individuals out. It's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life is be a part of that change. I mean, there's years of work to overcome the post-traumatic stress afterwards and help people gain life skills. And, that's just step one in a 1,000-step journey, but it's a very important step, is to get them out from the people that are either manipulating them or who are controlling them.
It's one thing to rescue somebody from the clutches of somebody who's selling them, but then they've got the rest of their life. And like you said, the effects of that can last, as you saw in your in-laws' family, that the effects can be intergenerational. So what are some of the programs or opportunities that are provided for these kids who are being rescued? And can you tell us about any success stories from that?
Yeah, I'll tell you my favorite organizations. There's a group called Magdala's House. There's one in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, called Delaney Street. There's one in Salt Lake called the Other Side Academy. They're full-time places where survivors can live, and they learn business skills. It's not like a government program. They actually operate businesses and learn to support themselves and gain new skills. And they really get that kind of reprogramming opportunity rather than just getting treated like a project. I mean, most states have got some local aftercare that are great and some that are okay. And then they'll have, some government programs that are less effective often. Either they'll just be set free, like, oh, look, we saved you. Good luck, and, kid doesn't have skills. They don't have a support group, and they're easily re-exploited, right? Or they'll be put into like a 1 week or a 2 week program. And then once they're considered fixed because they've been through the program, it's the same thing, right? The ones that I have the most respect for are the ones who really understand the mental game of helping them build a new set of skills, a new support network, and new contacts, helping them actually get a job, and have that longer term stability. Those are the ones that I have the most respect for.
And what about these kids who are 10, 11 years old and maybe they don't have family to go to? Or, what happens to them? Do they just go into a foster system? But it seems like they need specialized help.
Yeah, it depends, right? Depends on the country, depends on the state. Some countries where we've helped out before, the state will allow us to help fund an aftercare facility, right? Where those kids can go have kind of longer term healing, right? Other ones, it's like, nope, we handle it all and it's only government programs. We won't even tell you what happened to the kids. Same thing state by state across the US. Some places are much better equipped and have more sophisticated, more informed, like trauma informed programs. And others, like you said, maybe just have regular foster care, things like that. So unfortunately, it's not very standardized. And the best practices haven't been spread as well as they could be. And yet, to me, like the amount of progress our country specifically has made in the decade we've been working on this is just incredible. How many more programs there are, how many more nonprofits there are helping the faith community. The Catholic Church and many born again Christian churches and other faiths have really taken hold of this cause and made significant strides in helping out with this problem. So as much as there's a lot of work to do, it's incredibly optimistic to see how much didn't happen over the previous decades compared to what has happened in this decade. It's to plug your podcast. It gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, because I can imagine that even just 40, 50 years ago, there was probably no programs. There was nothing going on to help these kids.
Certainly not like there is today. There was this and that, and there was different programs, but it didn't have the exposure. It didn't have the funding. It didn't have the voters telling politicians and police chiefs, we care about this. It didn't have the resources that it's gaining now.
So how widespread is this program and how much of a dent are we putting in it? Because you do see news reports where it'll say 50 kids were rescued, 20 kids were rescued. But then it seems like there are these figures being thrown out that there are like millions of kids that are being exploited. And you start to feel like, is this just one of those starfish situations where you say it matters to this starfish that we're saving this kid? But how much progress are we really making against how large the problem is?
Statistics are hard to find on a lot of crimes, right? So there's a lot of estimates out there. A handful of years ago, the State Department estimated that of about 16,000 people per year sold into America, about half were children. So maybe 8,000 foreign-born children. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had a press conference with the Department of Justice saying that they believe at least 100,000 American-born kids will be exploited for sex by adults for money. So call it 108,000 in the US maybe, right? And you look at the FBI raids and the other local law enforcement, and we are not recovering a giant number of that. There is definitely a lot of work to do. Like I said, maybe it's 10 times what it used to be, but that still leaves a lot of kids that need help and more sophisticated programs and law enforcement training and updated laws and as much as anything, needs a lot more tips from the community. One of my favorite stories is a vice officer in Calgary, Alberta. We've done some of this work up in Canada. And he said before, when marijuana wasn't legal in Canada, they had a lot of grow-ups in Calgary and they got almost no tips because people didn't want to get somebody else in trouble. And then they started putting up posters saying like, hey, call if you're just suspicious. You don't have to know. If that person's got a whole bunch of ice growing on the side of their house, that might be a grow-up. Call if you're just suspicious. If they're not doing anything wrong, then there won't be any problems. And then you just got flooded with tips. And so he just talked about, man, if we had every parent, every citizen out there just keeping their eyes open for, an older guy with a young girl that doesn't look like he's related to, and she doesn't want to be there, right? Stuff like this. So he brings up one example. There was a hair salon in Calgary. This guy called in a tip and said, hey, there's this woman hair salon, but only men go in it. That doesn't seem right. And so they figured it was going to be more traditional prostitution going on. And he went in there undercover, and the woman behind the counter basically said, well, actually, do you want to just buy the girls? It's $5,000 for one or $8,000 for both, not knowing she was talking to a underage cop. And they were able to arrest her and get at least those two women out of that situation. Any one of us could have done that. Any one of us can call the cops and be like, hey, there's a massage parlor that looks like there's some weird stuff going on. There's a hair salon. There's it could be anything, right? We know about some of the motorcycle gangs here who they'll run a sex club in the industrial district, but only on Saturday nights and bring underage girls into it, stuff like that. It's kind of that, like, if you're just suspicious, call in a tip. Somebody's probably going to be offended and be like, that's my daughter, or this is my niece, right? That's going to happen sometimes. And you think of the cost of somebody being offended that they had to take 5 minutes out of the day to explain who they're with versus the massive impact it can be changing somebody's life. I mean, makes me wish we'd all have, all have our eyes open for that. One of the things we do in all of our talks and interviews that we do is we try to get people to program the human trafficking hotline that the Polaris Project runs into their phones. If people have that on speed dial, then they don't have to look it up at the time. So it's also something that's given just such great statistics comparatively, where you can look up what's happened over time, even from the calls that are coming in, right? So
what is this Polaris thing? Tell us about that.
The Polaris Project, they're probably the largest trafficking specific nonprofit in the country. Like, if you call in a tip, they will route it to the cops near you. They will let people text in. They will just help in so many ways, the victim or the person calling in the tip. But then they also help lawmakers and nonprofits and other people trying to get a handle on what's happening and what's changing. I would ask everybody who's listening now to pull out your cell phone and program this phone number. It's 1-888-3737-888. That's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And if all of us have that in our cell phones, then right when we see something, we can pull it out. So again, it's 888-3737-888. Doesn't matter where you're at in the country, that'll work.
So just anything you see that's suspicious, you can call in and say, hey, this seems weird to me. And they can say, okay, well, tell us more about that. Or, yeah, maybe that's just a weird thing. But I mean, they can make the decision for you. You don't have to make the decision. Hey, I've caught somebody. You can just say, I've seen something strange.
Right.
So I want to get into the side of this that we don't hear a lot about, which is the perpetrators. I think a lot of us have a tendency to say, well, these are just sick men who have problems and they should be locked up and the keys should be thrown away or they should be executed. And that's easy to say, but where are these guys or women? I mean, because like you said, there are women involved in this as well. Where are these people coming from? What are some of their backstories? Is there also something that can be done to prevent the problem on the demand side?
We've got quotes from FBI agents who say that they never bust a John without having copious amounts of pornography involved. You know, you look at how pornography these days has gotten younger and more violent. And when they spend so long fantasizing about that, how that could lead to them taking action at some point, right? If you look at the trafficker side, there's a report that was done in Chicago that showed that 60% of traffickers are former victims themselves. Man, when you hear that stat, like for me, I start having a little more compassion for the situation. You think it's maybe not quite so black and white as the movie Taken might make it seem like, right? You look at the demand side. I mean, to me, I feel like as an overgeneralization, there's really two categories of the perpetrators. There's the ones you might more think of who would be classically referred to as pedophiles, right? Who are specifically looking for really young children. And then you've got the more regular guys who they're just at the Super Bowl or they're just in Vegas and there's been a lot of drinking going on and they go out looking for a good time. You know, they've been consuming this pornography where the girls are younger and younger. And so this girl says she's 18 and she doesn't seem like a victim. You know, the guy has no idea she's been beaten and coerced and had horrible things happen to her for her to want to pretend like she wants to be here, right? But she doesn't look like a victim. She's saying she's 18. The guy wants to believe she's 18. She looks like the girls in the pornography, which is supposed to be only 18-year-olds. And there's like a good amount of self-deception going on there, right? This isn't like a hardcore pedophile. This is a guy who is lying to himself, trying to ignore his conscience.
So this brings up an interesting free speech issue in that we here in the United States, we tend to defend pornography and say, well, this is a free speech issue. This is content and everybody should be able to create whatever content they want as long as they're not exploiting children in the process. And so, whereas, you know, I lived in China and in China, they outlaw pornography 100%. But now we're getting into this age with technology, with deep fake, where we can create lifelike scenarios where nobody's being exploited in the process of creating this content. So essentially you can create child pornography with no children involved. It's just all computer graphics. And there are going to be people pushing this saying, well, hey, if no children are being exploited, what's the harm? This is just stuff that people are looking at in the privacy of their home. Nobody's being hurt. How do you respond to that?
It's hard for me to have a lot of patience for folks who want to say something like that. I mean, it's very indicative of a huge amount of ignorance of what's actually going on out there. To hear an argument like that, you know how like lawyers or all sorts of people can make up logical sounding arguments that don't have relation to real life. There's a number of issues involved with what you just talked about, but I mean, even the adult pornography industry is so full of rape and abuse. And, you know, there's plenty of documentaries for anybody interested. There's free documentaries on YouTube about women talking about the just intense misogyny and physical beatings and sexual assault that happens in the for-profit legal pornography world. Then you look at the illegal and the production of child sexual abuse imagery, and whether it's computer generated or not, there's the follow-on effects of how the human brain works. If anybody's interested, there's a great author named Norman Doidge And he wrote a book that I can't remember the title of, The Brain That Changes Itself. And he'll go through physiologically what happens in the brain with repeated exposure to content like that. So whether the first content ever consumed was computer generated or not, it has a similar effect. It's like you can give somebody an artificially grown opioid, it will create, like you can give somebody an artificial drug, it'll create similar things in the brain that would then lead to other substance abuse issues, right? When you look at the chemical dependencies and what is going on in the brain with the stimulation, I mean, there's incredible amounts of science out there to help people understand. To me, one of my favorite organizations that exists is called Fight the New Drug. Clay Olson founded that organization. They're incredible at helping people get over compulsivity, and people who want to quit consuming pornography, helps them overcome that, right? Man, Josh, I could talk for a few hours about that question, so I'm trying to limit myself here. But I'll bring it back to this, which is when you look at the incredible harm that is done by the reprogramming of human brain when individuals systematically and regularly consume sexual abuse imagery of children, that has major negative repercussions for society. And if we're going to be responsible adults and parents and create the kind of society where it's safe for children to grow up in, it does seem very irresponsible to have so little work done. We've got incredible teams at many law enforcement agencies called ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, who do really great work and are drastically underfunded. You know, if we would take this as serious as we take domestic terrorism, we could make a much safer society for children to grow up in. But it just takes voters telling the politicians, hey, get those law enforcement their budget and their training, or we'll vote somebody in who can.
How can people make a difference? I mean, you talked about some ideas, calling the Polaris hotline if you see something strange. But like at a political level, do I call my federal national senator, congressperson? Is it more efficient for me to work locally? Like, how do people get involved and make a difference? Where can they get the best return on their investment of time and money?
You know, when I think about the people who I've seen do the most good on this issue, there's some things that I would recommend as a starting place, which is get on Google human trafficking and your city name, and then Google child trafficking and your city name, and just start looking at the actual cases that have happened driving distance from your kids, from your house. My second thing that is incredibly impactful and turns people into the kind of folks that make a dent in this issue is if at all go in person to an event where a trafficking survivor is speaking or a law enforcement officer who catches traffickers is speaking. And if that's not available, go watch the documentaries. There's free ones on YouTube. There's a CNN one called Selling the Girl Next Door. There's a great one from GEMS in New York. It's a really great aftercare facility in New York called Very Young Girls. I mean, there's Netflix, Amazon Prime. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries out there. And when you actually get to see this girl and she talks to you about it, and then you actually get to hear from the cops and they talk about it, and they actually interview the traffickers on many of these, and you get to understand what's going on, it just becomes so real that it's very hard for people after that to not want to relieve unnecessary suffering. It can be overwhelming at first, and I can understand why people avoid it. Sometimes it feels very heavy, and I get that. There's times that I cry working on this issue, right? But I will say it's actually been the most fun hobby I've ever done is seeing the successes. I mean, I get a lot of like pat on the backs of like, oh, Jess, you're a great human being or something for working on this. And nobody gives me pats on the back for snowboarding. Like, I do snowboarding for fun. I try to help these kids for fun. It is the biggest high ever to like see a smile on one of these kids' faces and to find out like that all this work you and your friends were doing for a good cause actually turned into somebody's life getting changed. So I'll tell you my first experience. Not long after we'd started the organization, Lindsay Hadley was our executive director. And if anybody's interested in her work now, it's hadleyimpactconsulting.com. But she was speaking at Utah Valley University here in Utah. I was up in Canada at the time, but we had hired her down here to run it. She was speaking with a member of law enforcement to a big crowd of kids. And she just had this thought at the end of her talk. She'd never said it before at any of her talks, but she had this thought. And so she just said, By the way, if there's anybody listening to me who knows someone who's being trafficked, or if you are yourself, please come talk to us afterwards. We want to help. She thought, that was weird. Why did I say that? I mean, these kids are in college, right? And sure enough, place empties out, except one girl comes up and says, a family member has been renting me out to other adults since I was a little kid, and they still do it to me now that I'm at college. I go to school during the day and they rent me out at night, and I don't want to go home anymore. And Lindsay was able to walk her over to the cops right then, and she didn't have to go home that night. Obviously, I get choked up about it. So it's a tough issue. It's a tough issue, but man, is it fun to see the wins? You know, we've worked with trafficking victims who have become survivors and who have gone back to school and become therapists for other trafficking survivors. We've been able to be a part of youth programs where our kids have helped raise money for law enforcement trainings and then get invited to help write new laws for their state for how to protect kids. It's actually so meaningful and fun to be a part of, even though there's some depressing parts.
I've got one more question, which is, how do we protect our children? You're a father, I'm a father. How do we make sure that our kids are not getting involved in one thing or another that's going to lead them into this industry?
Yeah. So, you know, traffickers definitely target foster kids. You know, there's other studies shown about FBI study showed about 60% of kids found caught in their raids have been through the foster system at some point. So like one of the things we're doing there is we're working with America's Kids Belong, helping make these videos so that foster care kids don't end up aging out of the system without a support group and getting trafficked, right? Having your kids get involved with maybe the less intense parts of this to get them educated. Social media monitoring is super important. When you listen to cops on those internet crimes against children's task force, and they tell you all the things that different guys are doing on social media, posing as another 13-year-old girl, it can get pretty scary. There's really a lot about this idea of, are your kids in the kind of places where they can get targeted, right? Some common sense stuff shows up there. You know, there's a lot of progressive thinking and parenting of like, I'm just going to trust my kid. It's like, well, you know, they're not fully formed adults yet. And they're not often thinking about the part of town where this stuff is more likely to happen and where they are late at night and stuff like that. Right. But it's much less likely to be this like kidnapping thing, like the movie Taken. It's much more likely to be the older boyfriend who's telling her that he loves her and that she should quit high school and move to this next town with him and they should get married. Except when he gets her there, she finds out about the other 5 girls and he starts renting her out. Right. To me, watching a documentary to make sure you're okay with your kids seeing it and then rewatching it with them, getting your kids educated on the crime and the issue and possibly helping out with the issue, I think is important. I'll tell you one last story. The first kid who ever helped out, she was actually a family friend and she was our first youth volunteer. Well, a few years later, she kind of got in some trouble with drugs and was out of the house and had gone to a rehab in Calgary, Alberta. And there was these guys who were really not being nice to her there. And this other boy was being really nice to her and said, hey, this is a bad situation. Why don't you come to Vancouver with me to this different rehab? That's about a 9-hour drive away. And so she agreed to. And when they got there, it was just an empty building. And they literally locked her up in this building and took cell phone pictures of her and went out to other guys and said, hey, do you want to rent this girl? And what they were doing is they were bringing them back and then robbing them, beating them up and robbing them. And she said that it was because of being a part of child rescue that she recognized it wasn't going to be very long before they were actually renting her out. And so she said that's what gave her the guts to not lie to herself about the situation. And she worked up the guts and stole one of their cell phones and called her mom and said, this isn't a rehab. Here's what's happening to me. And I'm going to make a run for it. And if you don't hear from me by this time, will you call the cops? And their family was in a tight financial position. So they actually called child rescue to get some money to be able to get her back home from Vancouver. And her mom calls the cops immediately. Right. But that's a kid who's a close family friend of ours and has been for years. And I just never thought that it would have an effect on our network. I thought we were going to help other kids. Right. And, her seeing the documentaries, helping out with the cause is what helped her recognize and be honest about what's going to happen to her and have the guts to do something she'd been too scared to do for days.
Thanks so much, Jess, for talking to me about this stuff. I mean, to me, this problem, it's like you've got the Holocaust where Hitler killed 10 million people, 6 million Jews, 4 million other people. And you've got this stuff. And this is kind of like the same level to me. Like it's as bad of a problem as that. I mean, I don't know how you get any more evil than what these people are doing to children or what's happening to children. And I know it's nuanced because it's not just monsters doing this. It's people who have their own problems who are involved with this. But it does seem like the only way that we get out of this is through education, through talking about it and working to come up with solutions. So thank you for coming and talking about this.
Do you mind if I leave with a couple of extra things?
Sure.
So any dehumanization is rough, whether it's what you talked about that happened during World War II or many other crimes. I mean, they're all rough. That thinking of others as objects leads to a lot of problems, right? Unhappiness on all sides. I will say though, usually when we give speeches and stuff, it's actually much more optimistic than this because we're kind of just going off questions. And it's really the success stories. If anybody listening to this, you want to get involved in your community or you want to get your friends involved and call your Congress and your senator and get your school board to do some education on it and this kind of stuff, what I would recommend is search out the success stories because our first 6 months, we had almost no success. We would tell people these horror stories and these terrible statistics. And like moms would curl up in the fetal position and dads would be like, well, give me a $1 problem solver. I'll shoot the guy myself. And, unhelpful things like that. And when we started sharing success stories, people started going like, well, I want to get involved. How do I do this? We ran a youth program kickoff when we first started it. And we brought in a woman named Natasha Herzig, who unfortunately was manipulated. She was from California. They told her she was going to be going on tour to do makeup for models. And instead they rented her out to people. And NYPD ended up saving her. And America's Most Wanted actually did a show about her and was able to catch her trafficker. And she went on to, when she was speaking to our kids, she was married to a law enforcement officer, border patrol guy, and had a child and gone on to have a happy family and had spoken to Congress and had done so many good things for other kids. A different woman who spoke at the same one, Savannah Sanders, she was held against her will in a massage parlor in Phoenix, Arizona as a 15-year-old for 10 months and really, really had a lot of hardship and tough times recovering from that. But she ended up putting herself through ASU, Arizona State University, and got her degree and has been the head person in charge of entire aftercare facilities and has written books. And her oldest daughter just went to university and she's gone on to raise a family. And it's the success stories that I think are the magnetic part that get people to get involved. And I'll leave you with one last one. At that very first concert that Lindsay ran for us, the Candlelight Serenade, there's this great woman, Amanda Bonella. She had been in the foster care system and then had been trafficked. And one guy sold her to another guy who sold her to the Hells Angels. And she was eventually able to get out. And she went on and started an ice cream shop in the seedy part of Vancouver so that she could be in touch with the girls who were still in life and give out free ice cream to these girls and get them to open up and tell them that there was a way out, and helped many, many girls who were more mentally trapped than being physically trapped to be able to have the guts to escape that life. There's really courageous, both men and women, who rightfully own the term survivor. Reading some of those survivor stories too, and sharing some of those is probably the most magnetic thing I can leave with.
That's great. I'm glad we're ending on that note with some hope there. Are there any books that catalog these stories? Have these people written books? Are there any great ones out there that talk about these success stories?
There's actually quite a number, and there's even more that are coming out regularly. There's a guy named Victor Malarek who wrote the Natashas and other ones. I would actually be interested. I haven't kept up on as much of the books. I think some Amazon searches and some Google searches of the best books today would be interesting for people to see what the reviews are on the latest ones. But there have been a number of good ones come out, and probably haven't kept up as well on the ones that have come out in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks again so much, Jess, for being here with us on the Hope Strategy podcast and sharing all these details with you. Once again, where can people learn about your organization? Yeah,
childrescueassociation.org, or just find me on LinkedIn. It's Jess Larsen. Larsen is Larsen. I run a organization called Greystoke, is my for-profit business. Connect with me on LinkedIn and trade some messages, or just email me jess@childrescueassociation.org. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy podcast.